Welcome to the World Championship Air Race Podcast, giving you the behind-the-scenes look into the World Championship Air Race. My name is Alex MacPhail, and I'll be chatting to guests from the air racing community all around the world. Make sure to subscribe on your podcast platform to keep up to date with our latest releases. Now fasten your seatbelts, prepare for takeoff, and let's get airborne. Hello and welcome to another episode of Airborne, the World Championships Air Race podcast. Today I've got a very distinguished and wonderful gentleman with me. Steve Jones raced in the Air Race series right in the beginning of it all. After his strong racing career, he then moved into the administration and the operational side of things, involved in the racetracks, involved in training and camps, etc. His current role now is head of training and the race director of the GT, which is the developmental stage, the series build-up stage, and we're going to get into it. Started flying at a very young age. So welcome to you, Steve. I'm looking forward to this conversation. And how are you doing today?
Yeah, good. No, I'm looking forward to being able to explain what I know so far, because it looks like it's going to be a very exciting series. I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, well, I know a lot of people are too, and there's obviously some big changes that have happened, particularly as it relates to the area that you have quite a strong fingerprint on at the moment, which is wonderful. The GT, the Le Mans styles, team racing, etc. And we're going to get all into that. But before we get there, I wanted to just backpedal the years, only just a handful of years for you, and where it all began for you, and sort of how did the aviation bug bite you? Because I know it bites a lot of people, but it seriously left a strong imprint on you, and aviation has been in your blood from a very young age. So where was the beginning for you?
Well, I think it started as about a sort of 5-year-old family holiday, lying on the beach as a little toddler, watching a seagull sort of soaring along a sea wall in the wind. And I was just watching, thinking, crikey, how does it do that? That looks really clever. And so from then on, I was fascinated by anything that flew. And eventually, one of the things that flew was me, in early little aeroplanes, and I've enjoyed every moment of it. It's fantastic, and whether it's a little Cessna or a Boeing 747 or an Edge 540 or an Extra 300, I don't mind as long as it flies. I'm fascinated by it.
Well, that's good. Immediately my thoughts go to Jonathan Livingston seagull, because I grew up at the coast myself as well, and regularly go back to the coast. And seagulls, it is a beautiful thing, especially as they hover in the bit of the breeze at the coast. Any books around Richard Bach, Jonathan Livingston seagull aviation stories that stand out for you at that time of your life too?
Well, you being a South African, the flight of the Mugall, I like. Alex Henshaw, his account of breaking the record for a little single-engine aeroplane from London to Cape Town. Remarkable read if you can find it. The Flight of the Mugall by Alex Henshaw, very inspiring. Totally mad, but successful, and the guy broke some records. But Jonathan Livingston seagull, clearly. But that's about it. I'm not the greatest reader in history, but I just love airplanes.
Okay, right. So going back to that time, the story was that you sat on someone's lap and you were introduced to flying, and that's a wonderful opportunity to be able to see that and be exposed to it. Was that it for you? That I'm going to do this thing, and by the time you were old enough to get into flying, you did that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very lucky. I had a friend of the family who had a light aeroplane, and they used to either sit me on their knee, or I'd sit with a sort of control column up here and not being able to see out because the instrument panel was up here, but sort of learning very quickly that you see this little instrument that goes like that as you do that with a stick. And I sort of taught myself instrument flying at about the age of 6. I was just fascinated by the whole thing, So, and then in the early days, I was a bit of a sort of reprobate, so all I wanted to do was fly low and crop spray and things like that. But as I was hopefully getting qualified for that, it became very ungreen, certainly in the UK and Europe. So I ended up as a sort of reluctant airline pilot, really, but always looking very enviously at people that flew around at 0 feet in crop sprayers. And then, lo and behold, eventually air shows and air races and things started to appear, and I managed to get involved in that. So happy days.
Okay, now when you say it got very green, is it then the pesticides and the spraying of crops? Was that the part that was a bit frowned upon then?
Yeah, I think mainly because in countries with great, huge areas and less populated, less densely populated, I think, America, maybe Russia, Africa, where the area, the population density is less. I think it's better, it's more appropriate to do aerial crop spraying. But in the UK, where every field is the size of, an African backyard, it became there was too much contamination, I think, of populated areas and pesticides. So it just became it sort of fell into lack of use. So it stopped. So sadly, I had to go and work for an airline, but ultimately it worked very well. So yeah.
Okay. Well, I can relate to that feeling as well, looking and seeing those crop sprayers way down there. The flying training base in the South African Air Force is on the west coast at Langebaan, and there's also a lot of farming areas around there too. And I can remember flying around at 6,000 feet doing straight and level and medium turns, and there you can see a crop sprayer just about on the deck and a bit of a wing over after a run and a wing over, and that just looked like a lot of fun to me too.
Yeah, and I like the idea that some friends of mine that were crop sprayers, a few years prior to me trying to get into it, they just sort of went to work in jeans and a t-shirt or shorts and a t-shirt. And I thought that was the way to go, but there am I, all these airline pilots with their ties on and their epaulets and their hats. And I thought, to heck with all that. I'd rather just go with shorts and a t-shirt. More like my style of operation, really.
Yeah, sounds like fun. Okay, so it sounds like you reluctantly got into airline flying, but obviously there's some pros and cons with all jobs, and it is a wonderful career. It's very prestigious to be with Speedbird, with British Airways, and ultimately getting onto the 747 is a wonderful machine too. And what was the time frame between sort of being getting involved in serious airline flying with British Airways and getting back into the airshow circuit? I know you teamed up with Paul Bonham. Was that quite early on as being an airline pilot?
Not so much, really. As soon as I had any money, whatever I was doing, as soon as I had any money, I spent it on flying in aerobatics and buying shares in aeroplanes and things. So, I was a sort of hopeless case at wanting to do other things than airline flying. I just used the airline to finance my fun, really. But no, I sort of did competition aerobatics for a few years and air racing for a few years. This is back in the sort of 80s and early 90s. And then ended up doing air show flying and bumped into Bonham through that. We had a sort of double booking. We happened to be at the same airfield, same air show event with similar aeroplanes because of a sort of administrative error by somebody. So we just got talking and thought, hey, well, next year maybe we'll do some formation. So we did. We trained a bit over the winter, and then we were lucky enough to get some shows, he and I, in China and Japan and things. So we went and honed our skills in China and Japan in front of huge audiences, but not UK audiences. So when we came back to the UK, actually we'd had a lot of practice. People thought we were quite reasonable, So we got more work. We got more work in the UK then. So it worked very well.
Okay, which aircraft was this? Was this an extra or a Pitts, or what were you
Sukhoi.
showcasing at the time?
Sukhois.
Sukhoi,
So
okay.
Sukhoi 26. I think I was in a 29, a two-seater, and Bonham was in a 31 or something. They're all very similar. And then we kept swapping, and we had both ended up buying Sukhoi 26s and setting up our little sort of double act with our own two Sukhoi 26s. And we operated in the UK and Europe and China and Japan and places with those. So it was quite good fun, really.
It is a lot of fun. And okay, now I gather that Paul was the leader and that you flew the wingman. Which side did you prefer to sit, on the left or the right?
Well, it's a great story. I mean, everybody, 99 people out of 100 sit on the right-hand side because they find that, the sort of juxtaposition of your hands. But I always found myself
Yes.
joining other people's formations. So right from the early days when I was about 19, I was always joining some other pair. So I was forced to fly on the left. So I got the hang of flying on the left. So it was great. And I found then I could join all sorts of people's formations because I didn't get in anybody's way because I was on the other side, the less popular side. So basically, I flew on the left. Yeah.
Okay, well that's great. I was about to make it a bit of a rev. I also flew on the left, and looking away from the controls is the big thing. If you're sitting on the right, you can look over your controls, and obviously you and I will both know that it's much more difficult to sit on the left-hand side. But it's a box that we can tick together.
Exactly. Now all the experts fly on the left.
That's it. Great. And then you can, because now it's so much simpler. It's like flying IMC in formation. When you sit on the other side, you can actually see what your hands are doing on the throttle and the stick. Okay, good. It's all good fun. And airshow flying and aerobatic flying and flying in front of crowds, those are all exciting, fun things. And is this all happening, sort of trying to fill up all your spare time with flying outside of the airline? You do your flight, you come back, and then you go and do your proper flying, your air shows and aerobatics.
Yeah, we were very lucky in British Airways. Certainly, we're talking 20 years ago now, really, when we started the sort of serious air show flying. And we were very lucky in BA that we could arrange our work very effectively around what we wanted to do outside the flying. BA, as long as we covered the work that we had to do, they didn't care what we did outside that. So we were very lucky. We managed to maximise our time doing crazy flying and also doing the very sensible British Airways stuff. So it worked very well.
Oh, that sounds like a fun way to operate your life. Okay, and at the time, this was the Red Bull Matador team, is that right? I'm just trying to picture in which way it worked. Did you join the air races before, or did you get the Red Bull sponsorship before? Where was the relationship?
We were operating for, I don't know how many years, I would think 5 or 6 years at least without sponsorship, because we didn't really want sponsorship, because we felt that we would then be tied to some other operator, which we didn't want to be. We wanted to do our own thing. But eventually Red Bull UK said, hey, we'd like to put our logos on your airplanes. So we said, oh, all right, thank you very much. But that was, that was almost the same time, maybe a year or two after the first Red Bull Air race. Because I think we both flew our Sukhois in the early races. I mean, crazy, very slow airplane. Fantastic airplane, but not very fast. And so we flew those, and the first certainly the first year or two, we were flying those without any logos on them. So clearly we weren't sponsored by Red Bull for the first year or two as the Matador. We were just the Matadors, and then we became the Red Bull Matadors.
Okay, well, that was a good way of it all tying together in the end. Anyway, the Matador was a good name to go with Red Bull. So there was a bit of forward thinking there.
All right, so then... I was going to say, probably the interesting thing about it is that Paul and I and Peter Bessenier and a lot of foreign airshow pilots, there were some Russians, some Germans, some Frenchmen, some Americans. We were all working for a Swiss promoter, doing crazy flying in China and Japan. I mean, we had 9 of us in the formation under a bridge at the same time and things like this. And that was literally a year or two before the Red Bull Air Race happened. And that's how we got involved in the previous series, because they came to us and said, "Oi, you lot, clearly you've done a load of crazy things, and obviously successfully because you're still here. We're starting this new crazy race series. Would you like to be involved?" And so the idea was for whoever wanted, of this 15 of us or whatever it was, whoever wanted to be involved, and they said, "Look, clearly you lot are too old, but you set it up, you come up with the rules, and then as soon as you've come up with the rules, we'll get rid of you old guys and we'll get a load of young trendy guys in to take over, because that more fits our sort of our brand image, So we said, yeah, sure. Great, So and then actually they couldn't find any at the time. They couldn't find any young trendy guys and gals to take over. So we ended up doing it for a few years. So it was great for us.
Okay, so that was overt. That was in your face right from the beginning. That you're here to set it up to make way for the younger folk.
Absolutely right. And also, I mean, we were sort of slight victims of our own success, really, because we'd actually inadvertently we'd made it really difficult. So the early Red Bull Air races were really quite difficult to fly in, quite challenging courses and various other things, and the G was very high, and so it was very difficult for new guys and gals to come in, because it was a heck of a shock. There was nothing really to prepare you for that style of flying, and so we just sort of coped with it. But clearly after a few years we realised that we couldn't get new people in because it was just too blooming difficult. And so that's why we all then started thinking, like a motorsport, you all come up through the lower ranks of motorsport to whatever the higher levels. So we thought, we're going to have to come up with a plan here to introduce new people, because we want new young guys and gals in. So that's hence the old Challenger series and now the new GT class.
Okay, well, it sounds interesting. So you mentioned motorsport. I know you're involved in motorsport. At the time, were you racing cars as well? when you started with the Red Bull Air
I
Race
think I just
series?
had. I think I just had one very early car at the time, a 1957 Formula Three car. So I was, I
Oh
raced it
wow.
probably 4 or 5 times a year, which I love. Um, but there wasn't
Yeah.
much spare time in that period, and I didn't have much spare time.
Okay, but I mean, it's racing and the passion. I did a little bit of very, very elementary kart racing, and I could just feel that having come away from the airshow background, formation aerobatics, where you need to use energy in circles, etc., radius of turns, going around a racetrack, I only had to deal with 2 dimensions, and I didn't have third dimension, and I've got a brake. I can stop if I need to. It was like a logical sequence of events for me to take the corners. Not that I did particularly well, but I knew what I should be doing and how I should be operating it. And I suppose bringing in that element of car racing to the air racing, again, there's some nice cross pollination that you could have brought some experience that you brought across to the team setting up the Red Bull Air Race.
Yeah, absolutely. But the thing that it brought home to me personally, because I started car racing quite late in my life, um,
Yeah.
clearly I didn't learn as quickly as the youngsters. I line up on a grid, and I'm not normally the oldest guy, but I'm certainly never the youngest guy. And you quickly realise that the youngsters learn a lot more quickly. So
Mm.
my only regret really was not taking up car racing a bit earlier. So I could have probably learnt it a bit more effectively. So I think you it was a great
Yeah.
demonstration that you want to be, if you want to learn, you want to be young.
Yeah, it reminds me of a saying that my dad always tells me, like the older you get, the more expensive the toys get. So you never grow up and grow out of being involved with toys and fun, but the kit gets more expensive. And if you had access to the funds to be racing Formula 2, Formula 1 cars at 21, that would have been wonderful. But there's always a budget constraint.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I'm not complaining at all. It's all good stuff.
But okay, so it brings us to the point there. So that's it's quite interesting. I never realized that this was a specifically targeted. Right, guys, I know you're older and you're a bit more experienced. You guys set it up, and let's bring in the younger folk. And so now I want to talk about your experience being a race pilot, because you did that for a couple of seasons, and how you experienced it. Because I got quite a shock when I was chatting with Matt Hall the other day with this idea, chatting about his extra, and he went out to do a test flight, and he did. I said, "We're doing a bit of G tolerance." He said, "No, no, extra is not a high G airplane. It can only go up to 10 Gs." So, I mean, that's if your race plane is doing more than that, that's a lot of G. I mean, that's a significant amount of strain on your body and something to get used to. And as you say, you go through the series and you go to these race events, training events, and with every day of training, you get the gap between you and the person that wants to get in without a feeder series. It gets bigger and bigger because you're more and more accustomed, and the people are still nowhere. They don't do that kind of G training. What was your experience of becoming a race pilot and adapting to these G conditions?
Well, I think that's exactly right. And in the early days, it was different. I think in the early days, there were two big differences really. Firstly, the rules were less developed, so there weren't entry speed rules. There weren't, amazingly now, to hear myself say it now, there were no G rules. If you could pull as hard as you wanted, which is crazy. And the track
Yeah.
design was pretty wacky. Less sort of mature track design, and so
Mm-hmm.
that gave you a bit more flexibility. But also the airplane performance. Most of us were flying lower performance airplanes. There were a couple of guys, the Americans, that had Edge 540s just because they were competition aerobatic airplanes. So they had to
Mm-hmm.
cope with the high G right from day one. But the rest of us were in airplanes that actually certainly couldn't sustain the G like an Edge can. So that helped us in
Okay.
the early days, and we could then. I mean, I went from a Sukhoi to an extra 300S single seat extra to an Edge 540. So that allowed me to develop my G tolerance, because an Edge is an amazing airplane. If you haven't flown an Edge, you need a
No,
sort of
not
it
yet.
should comes with a health warning, because I mean it's a G monster. Somehow it just can
Okay.
sustain G like no other light airplane I've ever come across. It's amazing. So that comes as a real shock. And as you say, to do those extremely high G forces that can sustain them for quite a long time, not like a fast military jet, but nevertheless for a very long time for a light airplane. Um, and whilst
Mm.
you're doing that, you've got to fly it with supreme precision and accuracy and feel. And to do all those things at the same time is really quite difficult. And that's why suddenly, you get a young guy or girl in to do it, and they haven't got a hope to catch the guys that have been doing it for 2 or 3 seasons, because it comes as a bit of a shock. So hence the GT class as an introduction.
Okay, all right. Let me just spend a couple more minutes on the actual race experience. So, in your time racing, did you see an evolution of the rules, or did the kind of rules change after you had hung up your gloves from the racing days, or did you see from one season to the next that the entry speeds, G limits, etc., the restriction on the vertical maneuvers and things?
Well, I mean, in the early days, we saw the rules change during the weekend because literally we were making up the rules. We would meet each evening and say, "Hey guys, that rule, or there needs to be a rule against that because we need to stop that. It's going to get risky." So literally, so we would then say, "Okay, tomorrow you're not allowed to do that, or you have to do that tomorrow." So literally, we're all sitting around in the evening coming up with the rules for the next day in the early days. And then,
Wow.
and then at the end of the season, we had like a week-long meeting where we formalised all the rules for the following season. And then after a couple of years of that,
Sure.
we got quite a good set of rules. And nowadays they change. There are little tweaks here and there, like any conventional motorsport. But generally, the rules are pretty well developed and matured now. But in the early days, no. I mean, the rules changed literally. They could change throughout the weekend, and did.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean that is fascinating, and that is building the airplane as you fly it kind of thing. You evolving as you go along. Now, if we go specific to racing, you had a couple of seasons of good racing, and I saw a video clip of your time in Portugal where you won the race, but you were very kind of stoic and matter of fact about it. I'm sure inside you were quite pleased to get a win, but you attributed a lot of that success to, well, my aircraft was quite suited for this layout of racetrack. But tell me about that race win and anything you did specific with your aircraft or how you flew it as to result in the win.
Well, I think my airplane was well suited to that. We'd done a lot of work on making my airplane aerodynamically fast in a straight line, um, and
Okay.
Porto was a great sort of out and back track because it just follows a relatively straight river. I mean, fantastic. I loved it. But to be truthful, my airplane was well suited to that track. But I mean, clearly you've got to fly it well. I think I was up against Mangold, who was a very tough competitor. So
Yeah.
I was very proud to beat Mike. But no, I was always, I was the sort of worst competitor for emotion, as they say. If you showed a clip of me winning or being disqualified or coming last, actually, and if there was no sound, you couldn't tell whether I'd won or been disqualified because I looked the same. So I didn't, I wasn't very emotional. So I wasn't a great friend of the sort of TV directors because they all thought, oh, Jonesy won't smile or do anything anyway. So no, but no, I was very proud of my win in Portugal. I did one other win, I think, in Budapest, which I was very proud of. But yeah, I was sort of, I was happy to move on to do other things because, as I say, I'd sort of plateaued. I kept being fifth in the championship, and I thought, right, sometimes I get a win, then I get ninth or 12th or something. So I thought, I'm very happy to move out of the competition and maybe go into some other area of the race because I love being involved in the race and I think it's got great future. But I was happy to step
And
aside.
okay, well, I mean, it shows that you have the ability, if you've got a couple of wins under your belt, then to add value, giving it back to the series. Was there talks about what was available for you on the other side of the table, as it were, before you left, or did you say, I've had enough racing, and by the way, is there anything for me? What was the sort of transition like for you?
It was a bit like that, really. The organisers sort of clearly they talked in the evening that they wanted to get new people in. So I thought, maybe there's an opportunity here for a bit of horse trading. If I said, look, what might be available if I step aside and you get a new guy or gal in. I think they got Matt Hall and or Yoshi. I can't remember now, but so both better than me. And they said, well, there's all sorts. You can do a bit of commentary. You can do maybe training the. I think the first job was training the new guys to get under the bridge in Budapest. So I sort of devised a sort of training regime for guys who've never flown under a bridge before, which clearly is most of us. So I sort of developed a bit of a training regime to help them get under the bridge for the first time. So I think that and a bit of
Yeah, I
commentary.
saw that. I saw that clip as well, where you get the pylon with the ropes and fly next to it, feel comfortable, go under the rope, etc. Now, because you're still involved in training, I imagine it's something that you did quite well. But not only that, you must have enjoyed. You spent more than a decade at it. So tell me how your thoughts have evolved. Are you a flying instructor as well?
I was many years ago. I was an instructor on light aeroplanes and an aerobatic instructor on light aeroplanes, but that's decades ago. So But no, so I think I can. I think the best thing is I can see it because I've done so much in the air race in the past. I think I can see it from the pilot's perspective, where most other people can't. Um, with the best will in the world, way more experienced flying instructors than me, still probably don't quite know what it's like to try and fly under a bridge against the clock. For example. So, but having done it, I can sort of put myself into the mindset of the guy that might be doing it. Certainly for the first time, it's quite daunting. The first time you go under something like the chain bridge in Budapest, and other things as well. There are some funny little airfields that we used to fly out of, which were quite challenging to take off and land from. But so I can sort of put myself in their position, which helped a bit. At least I can talk to them and say, look, this is going to look really crazy as you approach it, but I promise you, if the thing will go underneath the bridge, or I promise you can land the airplane at this little tiny runway as long as you touch down by here. So I can sort of put myself in their position, and maybe imagine the other things that are going on in their head as well, the media interest, the competition element, maybe there's a jet lag as well, so I can sort of put myself in those positions, which helps a bit. I'm clearly, I'm not the world's expert on anything, but I've done a fair bit of that, so I think I can put myself in my mind into the same position that they're in.
And tell me, do you, as with a flying instructor, you get kind of personally, emotionally invested in your student. You're happy to see them go solo. You're happy for them to get their wings and these qualifications. Is it the same thing when you see these cadets or candidates is probably a better term? You're training them, you're getting them ready for it, and seeing them do well. I mean, does your emotions tie into their race careers as well for you, Steve?
Oh yeah, definitely, absolutely. I mean, I was so proud of the Challenger series. Excuse me. In the previous running of this, I was so proud of the challengers. If they all flew nicely and it was a tight race and they all behaved themselves to and from the racetrack and managed to land at these crazy little airfields, successfully, I was so proud of them. And if one of them managed to fly well without making any mistakes and win, I felt very proud, and I felt jubilant for them because I know what it meant to them. So no, I was very proud of the Challenger series, and I'm hoping very much to be proud of the GT class.
Great. I know we had a bit of a hiccup the other day while we got our conversation underway, so we're going to try and pick up the best we can to build up the energy that we had built up at that point. But just by way of recap and how we're going to pick up the conversation. So I think we got to a point where we were talking about air shows and your involvement with Red Bull and the time where did Red Bull come first with the sponsorship? You told me that you and Paul had the Matadors team, and later on it became the Red Bull Matadors, and that's quite a fitting name. I think that's where we got up to last time.
Yeah, I think you're right. Really, that's how we started. Paul and I were unsponsored initially, just trolling our way around initially the UK airshow scene, and then we got invited to go to China and Japan and do some shows out there, formation displays, and that really was what got us invited into the Red Bull Air Race when it started. Was our history of doing crazy things in China and Japan for the amusement of the local population. So when Red Bull started their air race series, we got invited to join.
And then remember the premise being that get some older, experienced hands at it who were crazy enough to do wild things at air displays, get them to set the scene, build up a nice SOP training manuals, and then move them along and bring in the young blood. But that just never really materialized because you're in a position where you have all the knowledge from within, and how do you share that knowledge? And that really brings us to the main point of our conversation today, being that now there are these air academies that are being set up, and there's a proper, well-established and developed feeder series, but there's a change to how the series is going to operate from the inaugural year next year. So maybe let's talk about, firstly, your thoughts on being this sort of established senior person with the view that you were going to hand over to somebody young, but there was no one young who had the experience or equipped at the time.
Well, that's right. We sort of inadvertently made it really difficult. That wasn't our intention, because the brief was pretty clear that once we got the series up and running, they would get rid of us lot and get the young trendy guys in and gals. But as you say, we made it so difficult that we then couldn't find any new guys and gals to get into it. So as you say, that's the reason for the GT class now is to more like a conventional motorsport where people come up through the other ranks. They work their way up. But in their racing, there's not really a way of doing that. So we've created the way of doing that. And I have to say, I think it's got the makings of being actually more exciting than the main series. That's, my aim is to make it really exciting. I'd love to make it at least as exciting as the main series. So whilst we're training people to do it. So yeah, it's going to be a great series. And the format obviously is slightly different from previously. So it's going to be exciting.
So let's indulge in this a little bit. We're going to get into the weeds here a little bit, but I can see the glint in your eye and the smile on your face that we're going to enjoy this little next few minutes of conversation. So explain, what is the new GT? I know it's now 3 people in a team, and it's a relay style race, but practically, and people have these crazy ideas, or is the prop still turning? Are people jumping in and out? Is there a race to get airborne? Explain in a nutshell how this exciting new event evolves as a team sport like Le Mans.
It's similar to Le Mans. So basically, at the moment it's 3 teams of 3 pilots, and it's a bit like a Le Mans series in that it's the aggregate time, it's the total time of each team's track flying that determines their finishing position. So we can't do it a prop turning, one guy jumps out, the other guy jumps in. We can't do it like that for safety reasons. So we have to have a bit of a gap. Even Le Mans and some of the other multi-driver series have a minimum turnaround time so that you can't risk safety by doing a really quick change. So we're not going to do that. So we're going to have the flying spread out through the day a little bit, but ultimately, where you finish in the race is down to your time and your 2 teammates' times, all added together. The shortest 3 race times wins the race, and I think it's got great possibility. Because there's going to be pressure both ways.
Sorry, there's going to be pressure both days, did you say?
There's going to be pressure both ways in that, if you set a great time and then your next teammate, also sets a good time, that's massive pressure on the third pilot. Or, if you've done a real duffer of a run, then suddenly, there's pressure on the other team for other teammates for different reasons, So I think it's got great excitement value.
No, certainly. Now, so if we go back to when the Masterclass and the Challenger Series was first then differentiated, was it 2014 the Challenger Series came in, and that was a great start to build the second tier, or the junior, the build-up level. Was there any sort of parameters to how many teams? I'm just curious about how we get to 3 teams of 3 pilots versus, I think there were 6 or 9 at one point on the Challenger side.
Yeah, it's basically numbers of pilots available, because we're starting again. We're really sensibly limited to guys and gals that have done it before, and then once we've got the series up and running, literally, I'm hoping the beginning of year 2, we can get some new faces in again. But at the moment, certainly for the first year, we're limited to the pilots we've got at the moment, because they've got the experience and the knowledge to jump straight into it and go. So we ended up with 9 good pilots that we would like to join the series. So that gave us 3 teams of 3. If we'd have had more pilots, possibly we would have added another team. But equally, we're conscious of the length of the racing day. So the more teams you have, certainly if you're running on the same day as the GP1 class, it can be a very long day. And so we're trying to sort of balance the maximum amount of flying, but without getting crazy long days, So we ended up with 3 teams of 3. But that's not fixed for the future. So if we can add some more pilots, then I'd love to add more teams.
Well, we're getting great response from all the social media channels, people reaching out on Instagram, Twitter, the website, LinkedIn, etc. And you're welcome to keep sending your questions through. But one of the questions was, what license do I need? Do I need a commercial license to train, or to be involved, or to be noticed to fly in these camps?
To train, we haven't set any minimum license requirements. So you need obviously a pilot's license to allow you to fly whatever aircraft you're going to fly in your training camp. And bearing in mind, these training camps can be all over the world. We're hoping that there'll be one in Australia. There'll certainly be one in the UK. We're hoping there'll be one in the States. So you will almost certainly be flying an aircraft on that register in that country. So you need a license to allow you to do that, to do the localized training, and then to come to the UK, or come to fly a GT class aeroplane. That they will almost certainly be on the UK register. So you'll need some form of UK license to fly that. And ultimately, to actually race in the series, we are setting a parameter that you need a commercial license to do that. You need to be a good pilot that can fly this sort of aeroplane dynamically and safely. So that's the thing that's likely to be found more difficult, is to have the skills in the first place.
Yeah, sure. Okay, well, that's good to know. And then just getting to the specifics of why you've changed this, the feeder series, having a chat with Willie a few weeks ago, who was talking about the fact that the Challenger series, similar kind of airplane, similar kind of pilot, similar kind of same racetrack, isn't, from the casual observer point of view, you can't really see much difference between the Challenger and the Masterclass. Obviously, the professionalism at the top end of the sharp end of the wedges is quite distinct for the people competing, but for the person just watching, flicking through the channels, you don't see much. But with this change in GT, there's now a great opportunity to showcase something different, and it's a different airplane. So maybe just talk about the performance between the H540 and is it the extra 300 you're going to use now with the GT class?
Yes, that's right. It swings and roundabouts. In the old running of the Challenger series, where they ended up flying quite high performance Edge 540s, it was good in that it was a great feeder. When they went from a Challenger class airplane to a race airplane, the performance gap was smaller. But as you say, the spectators couldn't really see a lot of difference. Whereas now we've gone back a little stage with the performance of the airplanes, but that allows us to get more people into the series because it's not quite as high a performance airplane as the old series Challenger class. So it allows us to get more people in and train them. It does give us a little bit of a knock-on issue then, in that we have to train guys to jump from the GT class to the GP1 class, but we'll cope with that when we get there. But yeah, it gives us more opportunities if flying the extra 300. Also, of course, it's a two-seat aeroplane, so the new series is going to be a little bit more of a flying festival, if you like. So there are going to be other things happening in the air on race day. So it allows us to use these airplanes for other things on the sort of festivalization, if you like, of the race event. We can do other things with the airplanes when they're not racing. So that's also a plus point. And finally, really, there are more extras around the world. So for the other training organizations scattered around the world, they're more likely to be able to get a similar airplane to train the guys on, and then send them to us for a sort of final check and test, because there are more extras around the world than there are Edge 540s, so that also helps.
So is this the two-seat extra that you can use, the 300, is this going to be a standard aerobatic airplane, or is it modified to race at all?
It is modified, so the only ones that can race in the track really are ones with slight modification. There are a few safety modifications. We've got sort of pylon hit guards and modifications and little cutters on various parts of the airplane, so that it minimises the chance of getting gate material hung up on the airplane. So we modify them a little bit for that, for safety reasons. So there's some minor modifications. And then, of course, we've got to match them so that the performance of the GT class airplanes are as close as possible. And then we've got to police the competitors, because we know that they'll be doing everything they can to make their airplane faster than the other ones, whilst we also try and match them all the time. So we're going to have a very very strict scrutinization team of engineers who check their airplanes over to check that the GT class pilots haven't done any demon tweaks to make them go any faster.
Okay, and then I understand then certainly for season 1 2022, when it rolls out, the GT class is going to be operating with the aircraft, the extras that are owned by World Championship Air Race or the body that's running the program. And then does this airplane then stay within your control all the time, or does the team get allocated it for the year?
The idea is that the team get allocated it for the year, which allows them to get their sponsor's name on the airplane. Very important. So the aim is to do that. We are planning to ship a spare aircraft, equally matched and modified for racing, so that if one team gets a technical issue, we should be able to supply them a spare aircraft. That's the hope. But no, the team gets allocated their airplane at the beginning of the year. They can get their sponsors' names on it, but they're not allowed to modify it much. Virtually no modifications, because, as you say, the airplanes are supplied by World Championship Air Race. So that's the idea, is to keep them as matched as possible. Close racing.
Okay, well, it does sound exciting. I mean, and the idea that you could build from here, that you've got 3 potential new pilots per team, that gives you an opportunity of a 3-factor increase in the number of people that can gain awareness and opportunity to get involved in racing. If you look at all the motorsport, they always have a feeder series, but it's not common to have a feeder series that has a 3-into-1 feed. I know you're still building, so you've got only a number of teams at the moment, but surely you can see the vision of this thing, that's going to be potentially 5 or 6 race teams, and that gives you 20 odd new pilots per year.
Yeah, which is great. And then the sort of dynamic of selection. Do you get selected for promotion to the GP1 class? That, of course, what we're saying at the moment is the top 3 points finishers in the GT class are eligible for upgrade to a GP1 class. But of course, that really is then dependent upon the team principal of the GP1 teams. Do you get invited? Do you come up with a decent contract? Things like that. Are you better than their current pilot? And if the team principal from the GP1 class thinks you're a better pilot than their current one, then that's good news. So I think there's going to be hopefully a bit of a dynamic between movement of race pilots between GT class and GP1.
Yeah, that does sound exciting. There's a great opportunity there. But now you mentioned the top 3. So is there an individual points within the team points as well? Would you track each person's race stats themselves?
Yeah, the championship at the end of the year is awarded to the team. So it's the team that's got the most team points wins the championship. But equally, there are individual pilots' points awarded. So you could have one of the pilots in a team that's got the most points. So they would be the winner of the points championship for the pilot, the individual championship. But the main championship is a team event. So. But the individual pilot's finishing position will be crucial, and it's likely to be what upgrades them or what gets them invited into the GP1 class, because it's their individual performance which will dictate to the team principal of the next championship up whether they get invited in or not. But it's to be clear, the GT class is a team event, so the championship is awarded to the team. But there's equally piloted individual points as well.
Okay, that makes sense. And then if you're sort of looking forward 3 or 4 or 5 years, is the plan then that World Champs continues to own the aircraft, or would there be a team event that could then build into the GT series as well, individual teams?
Well, I mean, all options are being looked at. Setting it up we're sort of winding the clock back really to the beginning of this type of air racing. But so a couple of quite a long time we're winding the clock back. So we want to get it up and running effectively to start with, and safely and effectively and in an exciting fashion. But yeah, who knows what the future holds? I would like to see different airplanes in the future. These are great for the moment, but I think in the future we probably will end up with different types of airplane. And of course, in the future, we've got plans to do different classes of aircraft and also some electrification, hopefully. So watch this space really for the future.
Yeah, I'm excited. This conversation about electrification, we'll pick it up again later on. But just shooting the breeze here a little bit, Steve. What do you think is a view for an aircraft change in 2 or 3 years' time for this feeder series, the GT?
Well, I think it will depend upon what festivalisation we want to do, whether we want to continue with single 2-seat airplanes, whether that's effective or not. I mean, it's looking like it is going to be effective at the moment, but who knows, 2 or 3 years' time. We discovered in the previous series, things change, people's viewpoints and needs change. So certainly we would expect some form of change of machinery in the medium term. But I really don't know. If I did know, I'd tell you, but I don't. But I would say in a few years' time, we're likely to be with different machinery. But I don't. I'm not hiding anything. I don't know. But so yeah.
Okay.
Personally,
At
I
this
would like,
stage, the,
personally, I'd like to
yeah,
see
go for it.
some
Personally.
slightly higher performance airplanes in the future for the GT class.
Okay, so the gap between the GT and the GP1 is just not as large as it will be next season. Is that what
That would be my personal hope, but certainly that's not Championship Air Race's view at the moment. But it'd be nice to get more performance.
Okay, all right. And then if we go then to the sort of the actual race weekend. So currently, the 2022 season, there's the GP1 and the GT racing on the same day.
Yes, there is. I think that's still up for grabs a little bit. I was at a meeting, I think a week or so ago, where they were still trying to work that out. And it'll depend. It may even depend on the venue, whether the venue wants, qualification events and race events on the same day. So we're not. I would say that's not absolutely finalised yet, but certainly GT class will be racing the same weekend, certainly. Hopefully the same day.
Okay, so and in your mind again, going forward to how this could grow. Currently, 3 teams. That's the 9 pilots that are available. I mean, where would this cap out? What do you think the maximum number of the GT series could be? Number of teams?
Probably. I'm really just guessing in my head now. I would say probably about 12 pilots flying, because otherwise the length of the day can get out of hand. So if you had possibly 4 teams of 3 pilots. Is likely to be, if you're trying to do it all in one day, is likely to be the maximum, because then you've that then is 12 pilots in the GT class, and you've also got 12 in the GP1 class. So 24 pilots flying in a day is a heck of a lot of flying. So I would say that's likely to be the upper limit.
Okay, so we've set the stage there. For those of you out there listening and wanting to get involved, there's a gap for 1 more team, 3 more pilots. So now's the time to sharpen your skills. Heard it here first. Okay, well, that's exciting. I want to move into the conversation about the training camps as well, and the sort of the build-up before we get there. I know this all falls under your domain. So, again, if we peel back the time a little bit, the series started, and then we had to figure out the rule book, and then the rule book was modified, and then became a Challenger series, and then you had to have these training camps. Where's the situation now where you have a final qualification camp, and before that there might be 1 or 2 screening camps? Is there a protocol that you're running through, or is it still a little bit loose as regards to identifying talent, or once talents are in the smaller talent pool, you then bring them through a series of camp A, camp B, and qualifying, or what is the process currently?
Yeah, that's it really. We've get in touch with World Championship Air Race. So if you think you've got the skills, get in touch. And we've got quite a few people already, so there's quite a reasonable queue of potential new race pilots. And the idea is that we know that we've got some incredibly talented, experienced race pilots around the world, the guys that are currently racing or were racing in the previous series. So they are, some of them, in a very good position to run their own training organisation. So that's the plan, is the pilots, let's say Australia, let's say America, they get allocated a few local guys to train in a basic fashion at these international camps scattered around the world. And then the idea is, once the organizer of that training camp, for example, let's say Matt Hall, let's just pick a name, Australian Matt Hall. Let's say he wishes to run a training organisation in Australia. I don't know if he does, but if he does, it's an example. So once the guys and gals that he's watched fly and trained, if he says, right, I've had 5, there's only 2 that I like the look of, so Jonesy, I'll send them up to your training camp, either in the UK or somewhere else that we want run the final training camp. And so then World Championship Air Race runs a specific training camp for final screening and sign off qualification for a racing license. And that's how we see it. So lots of people can have a go at it at these international training camps. But the ones that get through those training camps are then eligible to come to us, World Championship Air Race, and we give the final look over of them, the final bit of training at a proper race track organised somewhere, and then if they're successful, they're in. But having said that, they're in. Or
straightforward.
They've got. It sounds very straightforward. They've got the license, but of course, they still need a space. So they still need to be invited by a team principal to join the team. And we just don't know at the moment. There might be space for a sort of a test driver, if you like, like you would see in a conventional motorsport, where you've got a team of 3 pilots, but maybe the team principal thinks, well, I've got another one who's got great potential, so I'll just let them do some ferry flying or some of the training flying or whatever, So there's lots of options which we're looking at. And again, the rules are evolving for this. But my view is we want as many new people as possible. So I'm very keen to get as many young, new pilots into this as we possibly can. So, get in touch. We'll try and get you trained, and then hopefully we can find some spaces. But as I've said to you, there's likely to be only 12 seats in the maximum in GT class. So there's not many spaces.
Well, it certainly adds the pressure and it adds to the motivation for the individual, which is great. And, if you build your talent pool and the interest from the general aviation space, people are wanting to get into this as a way of living, as a way of life, as a career, it also adds value to what is the current World Champs Air Race, because it gets more prestigious and there's more people trying to vie for a limited number of spaces. And I certainly get the sense now, Steve, having chatted to a lot of people in the organization, some of the race pilots, there's a sense that this evolving, what is going to be the World Champs Air Race starting next year, there seems to be more scope for more growth and development, and there's an excitement and a buzz about it, which, look, I wasn't very close to it before, but certainly there's an improvement over the Red Bull Air Race model. What are your thoughts on how you're building and developing?
I would agree completely. I mean, the Red Bull series was fantastic. I had a great time in it. They looked after us very well. It was a fantastic series. If we look back to what they've developed from nothing to where we are now, we owe them a great debt. So they were fantastic. But if you had to say there was one downside, was the strength of their brand. Clearly everything was Red Bull branded, and that was a fantastic thing in terms of making the series work. But equally, it stopped you developing and finding other sponsors in many cases. So I think now we've got pretty much a blank sheet of paper. We can go in any direction we wish without any brand issues. So I think that will allow us to. We've changed the model. That will allow us to develop, hopefully rapidly, and really with very few constraints.
Yeah, well, it seems like it to me. And also the specifics of trying to build the feeder series, there's a demand to make what is the Premier Series, the GP1, even more, not exclusive, but a higher reaching goal that, once you get there, you really know that you're the top flight. But there's a few more steps on the way to get there. I mean, if there's already competition for maybe 3 spaces that are potentially there in the GT, you can imagine then these 12 pilots trying to get back into GP1, knowing there's a team style sport in the GP1 where a pilot can be replaced from the team principal, that they're no longer linked. That puts the pressure on the individual's performance racing, but it also gives the opportunity for the guy in the feeder series to say, well, if I'm good enough, I'll get a nod. So I just get a sense that it's more inclusive, and it's more sort of well thought out in the build up, and the catchment seems a bit wider, and the draw of the development and all the aspects to make this a bigger, wider, more longevity series. Seems to you guys are onto something good here.
Yes, I think so. I would agree with all of that. Because I think in the old series, everyone developed their pilot that they supported, but that pilot had generally been there for years. So great in that they became part of the furniture, but equally terrible in that there was not enough moving through. There's not enough churn of pilots. The new people coming through. That certainly that model has changed, and I think it's for the better.
And then if you go back specifically to the camps once more, the final proving camps, so Matt Hall and his team in Australia, they've screened several, they're passing on 2 to you in your camp. What does that camp look like? Is this a week long or 2 week long? I mean, what is the process? Presumably anywhere from 2 to 10 people get together from around the world, and they sit down and they kind of get to eye each other out, and you get to talk to racing with them and what it's all about, and low to the ground stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we ran quite a few training camps in the previous series. I think 6 or 7 camps in the previous series, and typically they were, depending on the experience of the candidates, they were between 5 and 7 days. So I would suspect these will be at least 5 days. And how we used to run them in the past was that we examine the guys, get them to fly at a reasonably safe height, and see what sort of mistakes they make, and give them a few little tasks to perform at a safe height and see how they get on, and then gradually bring them down. And we have basically we have an entire track built at a quiet little airfield somewhere. Could be anywhere. We've done Spain, we've done Slovenia, we haven't done the UK recently, but Spain and Slovenia are the last 2. We did one in America, and basically we built an entire track. And then so slowly, day 1 we get them through a gate, day 2 or 3 gates, and then ultimately we get them flying an entire track, and then we give them a few little emergencies to handle in the track, and some awkward wind conditions. If the weather plays ball, we get them to fly in some awkward wind conditions, or we build in an imaginary issue that crops up halfway through the race weekend that the crowd have. So we have to change the track at short notice and see how they get on with that. So we give them a few little curve balls to see how they cope, and really it's to check their safety and their common sense and their handling ability. The racing side of it generally comes down to the team principal to train them the fastest way around the track. We can give them a few tips, but we're really there not to hone their race skills, but to hone their safety, track flying, emergency procedures, and common sense skills, really. And we're going to leave the actual ultimate race ability to the team principals to get that out of their new candidates.
It reminds me a little bit of the airline screening interview where you have your psychometric tests, your technical exam, and then you go into the simulator with some of the people that are going to be on the interview panel, some instructors or check airmen, they will sit with you. And again, you just throw a few curveballs and see what happens. And sometimes, again, throw your curveball, pause the whole thing, see where you went wrong, give them a tip, and do the same curveball again and see if the candidate is able and willing and receptive to learn, and would they do the same thing again, or they take on that new information. Have you spent some time in the simulator, Steve? Have you bringing some of those lessons across into air racing?
Absolutely. I think you and I both received a few curved balls in our times, so it's fantastic stuff. And so yeah, absolutely. And as I used to tell the guys in the previous training camps, it's not really the mistake you make; it's how you handle that mistake and what you do about it. And if you make a complete bloomer or a howler of a mistake, we all do that. It's just what you do about it, and whether that then causes you to make other mistakes, or whether you put your hand up and say, sorry, I've made a mistake here, but handle it effectively. So it's the outcome that really is ultimately what we're looking for. And so we're happy for guys to make mistakes as long as they handle them reasonably well.
And are you able to share an example of what you do, throwing them some kind of a minor emergency while they're airborne in the track, just to get a sense of what it's about?
Yeah, the ultimate one is eventually, of course, we give them at least one simulated engine failure in the track. So, when we think they're starting to get cocky, and you can normally see that in their flying and how they talk on the radio. So you think, okay, well, I can feel an engine failure coming on, So we then, we've briefed them what to do and what we'll say at some stage. We'll give them a simulated engine failure. So we wait to some relatively awkward position in the track that we know that it's handleable from there. And we just say, cut, cut, cut. And then they are obliged to throttle their engine back to idle and cope. And whatever that coping may be, they've got to try and position the airplane into a position from where they could make a half-sensible landing. And it's really without hurting anybody else. If they have a crash landing into a vegetable field, that's fine if they manage to do that. But they mustn't do it with risking anyone else. So that's really what we're looking for. We will have briefed them about these things beforehand, but that's the worst case scenario. So, and generally, if it doesn't go very well the first time, we'll say, okay, that was a bit of a mistake. How would you do that differently next time? and they'll think about it. They'll go away and think about it. They then know that they're going to get another one, because if it didn't go very well the first time, they won't sleep very well that evening, because they'll be expecting another one tomorrow. And we work with them. I'm not really there to make their life difficult. I'm there to help them get through, but they've got to get through effectively. So we'll give them another one, and if it takes 3, we'll keep going and allow them to learn. So that's the sort of one of the that's probably the most dramatic emergency simulation. But they all cope. We've all done it, and generally I fly occasionally in the track, so I'll normally give myself one, see how I get on as well. So because I certainly don't believe I know it all, so I always learn something. So I'll throw myself in a simulated engine failure occasionally as well.
Yeah, well, I can remember from the days where we trained these kind of turnbacks from the flying school in the Air Force, and the quite common is that people misjudge that they've got too much energy and they overshoot the land back rather than can't make the land back. That's often a surprising thing when you're demonstrating this to new pilots or students that figure that, this is, we've got to make this happen, you've got to land back, and then they cut the corner too much and they're too high. And that's a whole different situation that you have to deal with too. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's we've all learnt to fly in various different ways and various different industries, but nobody, there's almost nobody, unless you're a crop spray pilot, there's almost no one that's given themselves an engine failure at very high speed at 10 meters above the ground. So that comes as a real surprise to most candidates. But then they realise, actually, as long as you're going really fast, and generally these airplanes are, you actually have got quite a lot of energy, so you've got a little bit of thinking time. But then, having seen that for the first time, you then look at the track differently. The next time you fly a track, you think, okay, over here is somewhere I can land. Over here is somewhere I can land. Over here is somewhere I've got to avoid at all costs. So it gets them thinking about potential issues for future, and hopefully that every new track they see, then when they look at it, they think, okay, I've got some options over here. I've got no options over there. So it gets them thinking.
Yeah. And is there a sense of camaraderie? I would imagine so. You go through this process where you're in this final training camp in the UK now, and there's maybe 6-8 candidates going for it. Is there a sense of camaraderie, or are there people quite tight-lipped, trying to just make sure they get themselves through and get ahead of their competitors?
Well, there's a bit of all of that, really. Generally, there's a great sense of camaraderie. Certainly in the previous runnings of it. Because it's not really. We're not really looking for a minimum number. I mean, if 8 people are at the camp and 8 people are good enough, then 8 people are eligible to get through. So you're not really fighting to get over somebody else, to get in. But if all of them are good, then all of them, at the moment, the idea would be to give all of them licenses, and then the next competitive bit is to get yourself noticed and invited by a team principal. That'll be the ultimate decider of whether you get a race seat or not. Is whether a team principal invites you into their team. So it's a good-natured. I've never had a bad time at a training camp. They're good-natured training camps. Everybody learns, quite hard work, but fantastic flying, and everybody enjoys themselves.
And I think with all sports, as it's evolved over time. I imagine, I don't know if this is the case, I imagine the beginning with Brezhnev yourselves when you started this whole process years ago in the flying air shows in the East and then bringing it to Red Bull Air Race. It was a case of this is what we do and we develop into racing. But as time goes on, you've got professional athletes who follow, they're trying to lose 4 kilograms that make a difference to the race aircraft, get fitter, get stronger, get their reaction time, acuity, all those things up. And there's a professionalism as it relates to the body, the human performance of the body going into a race weekend and, throughout the season, keeping fit. People are trying different things to just keep themselves sharp. Is there any sense of that in the race camps? I'm just imagining a Navy SEAL type hell week just to see who can get through and then ready to apply. Is there any sense of physical fitness or those kind of tests as well?
Oh, there is, yeah. Generally, it's not my area. Not being a supreme athlete myself. So that's not really my area of expertise. Most of the guys and gals that have turned up in the past have been on some form of fitness regime already, because they know that it is very demanding on the body. So you do need to be fit to do this. And also, the actual race doesn't last very long, but the weekend is tiring. So you do need sort of strength and endurance and physical well-being really to survive the weekend, because it's a pretty tough old period. But so most of the youngsters that come in are fitter and better prepared physically than their instructors. So it does need to be something that needs to be handled. And certainly in the early days, as you say, going back to the early days of the Red Bull Air Race, where Peter Bessanier, myself, and some of the other guys, we were just trying to survive the weekend, really. So, and trying to come up with some rules and things. So the fitness regime was not really as well developed back in those days, but it has to be nowadays. So yeah, it's definitely part of the training. It's certainly awareness of fitness and well-being is vital nowadays. Like as it would be in any motorsport, any competitive event. Yeah. It's very important.
And there's also there's a sense of these sort of big main sports with big names. The people get an idea. Well, in motor racing, this guy's the fittest. In rugby, that guy's the fittest, etc. Is there a guy that stands out in the World Champs Air Race everyone knows that he works the hardest in his fitness and mental acuity, and he's the guy to benchmark? In the previous runnings in the Red Bull Air Race, there were guys who were physically very tough. I'm thinking of sadly no longer with us, Alex McLean, who was probably the strongest guy. I mean, had arms like some sort of Disney caricature. He's a really tough guy and did a lot of work on his physical ability, as did Mike Mangold, American ex-racer. Yeah. So they were probably the toughest physically, which helped them in many ways with the physical demands of flying the aeroplane. But equally, they were both often guilty of pulling too much G, because I think they found the airplane so physically easy to fly that quite often they used to pull too much G and get penalties for pulling too much G. So it's a balance, really. Certainly, I think a lot of them do mental acuity training. I think I wouldn't wish to name any names here, because I think some of them keep it quiet. But certainly some of the very successful racers in the past, I've caught either discussing or doing mental acuity tests and training. So I think anything you can do, literally anything that you can do to improve your physical well-being is definitely worth doing. Okay, well, that's good. And it's nice to see the professionalism in all sports. It's taken over. And I remember a conversation with Ben Murphy last year about he had a conversation with his technician, and he said, look, you need to lose another 7 kilograms and we're going to improve I think it was 7 kilograms. We're going to improve your race times. And he said, all right, let's do it. And gave himself 2 months. And there we go. He lost the 7 kilograms and he did improve his time. So, where there's a will, there's a way. But, thinking about the combination of Formula One, it's racing and air racing, is the minimum weight, an individual who's 60 kilograms, does he have an advantage over the bigger guy who's 6'4"?
I was at a meeting where they were discussing the minimum weights very recently. I can't for the life of me remember what they came up with, but it's certainly it's a meeting that we've rerun right since the beginning. The 6'2" heavy guy is always arguing with the 5'2" light guy of how the rules should be interpreted. So definitely there is a minimum pilot weight included in the race mass of the aircraft, but I can't for the life of me at the moment remember what it is. But it's a subject, it's a hot subject that comes up every time the pilots get together of what we should do about pilot weight. But there is it's mostly averaged out, but I'm not convinced it's completely averaged out at the moment.
Okay. I can just picture people like Mark Webber. I think it was 6'1", 73 kilograms, racing Formula One against people 58 kilograms. There's a significant difference right there. But if there's a value that the aircraft then adds in together, then maybe it doesn't make such a big difference. But there'll be a point where you don't want a 100-kilogram pilot racing, because those last 10 kilograms you can't account for. That's just on you.
But what we don't want is team principals just selecting people on weight, which ultimately that could happen. You just get a load of jockey, tiny race pilots, which is clearly not really what we want. So that it is handled, but at the moment I can't actually quote you what the rule is. But it's a hot topic that comes up very regularly.
Yeah, well, Steve, very excited to see how this thing unfolds, and obviously, as it relates to, there hasn't been racing for a number of years now. Presumably, there's a bit of a get together and a shakedown happening later this year. Is there anything you can share about that, where the race pilots get together in a camp, the actual qualified race pilots?
Nothing that I can share at the moment. There's a lot of talk about it. I know that the aeroplanes engineers are working on the GT class aeroplanes working on a regime of matching them. We're going to match the engine power. They're obviously going to weigh them. They've come up with some of the modifications that are going to be required for safety, because these particular extras haven't raced before. So we're just coming up with a regime to modify them. But in terms of the flying, we've set no dates yet, because that really is going to depend on the first venue for the race and the timing of the race, because we're looking at various options. Obviously, we can fly the GT class pilots in the UK, which is where the aircraft are at the moment. But also, we could wait for the first venue and turn up a week early at the first venue, depending on how the first venue could cope with that. It depends where it is, and I'm not quite sure where that's going to be yet. So we're looking at all options. We will be ready to go, and we certainly will have at least 2 to 3 days, hopefully 5 days, really for the GT class of practice before the first race.
Okay, and then just some specifics about the race pilots. Surely the people that are contending for the top 5 positions, I suppose, Matt with the reigning champion, etc. Do these sort of competitors have their own pylons that they set up in an area nearby? Can they go and race around a pylon themselves, or is this like proprietary equipment that they're not allowed to use? Is there any limitations like Formula One? You're not allowed to go and race your car because there's limited track hours, etc. Is there anything like that in the World Champs Air Race?
To my knowledge, nobody's got any pylons that they race around. Certainly not full-size pylons, because actually it sounds like a good idea until you see one in the flesh, and they are immensely big. So you need a pretty decent team of people to put them up, and so not many individuals can do that. So in the past, nobody's done that. But equally, in some ways, you don't necessarily need a pylon. You can just put some. If you live out in the desert, somewhere, you can put some markers on the ground and go and fly at them and around them, as long as you're careful. I'm not recommending you do that if you haven't done it before, so please don't do that if you're just watching. So just be careful. But some of the race pilots do that sort of thing, I know. But none of them have got a full set of pylons, because they're just so immensely big when you see them. But they will be G tolerance, of course, is a big thing. So they will all be flying their aeroplanes to get the G tolerance up as soon as possible. That the first date's announced. So there's a lot that they can do. And they will be doing it, but I'm not sure they'll be doing it quite yet.
And in terms of simulators, are there simulators that are quite accurate? Does everyone have a simulator? Is there one that everyone can use, or is there like an endorsement level of simulator, or how do simulators feature in World Champs Air Race?
The simulators I've flown in the last few years are actually very good, but I think they're all proprietary. The teams have developed them themselves, and I was always very keen for them to sell them, because they're fantastic things. It's a mix. Generally, their simulators are a mix of their own technology and other off-the-shelf technology. But some of them, I flew a couple that were excellent, I have to say. Clearly, you can't experience the G-force that's going on while you're trying to fly this airplane, but they're actually very good. So again, out of touch, things change so quickly in these areas. So I'm sure simulators only get better. And as I say, 2 years ago, I flew one that was fantastic. I don't know not sure what to advise on that. Not really my area, but they're definitely a good one. Do some research before you buy one, but a good one is very good.
Okay, well, that's good. Well, last couple of questions for you, Steve. It's been great chatting with you. A bit of a rapid fire to round things up here. So when all's said and done after the race weekend, it's been a busy event getting around the world, and the racing is finished. Calm, you can hang up your headset and you put down your clipboard. What is your go-to meal at the end of race weekend?
Normally, it's a cold beer is my My go-to meal. um, Generally, we're so absolutely exhausted. A few times, Jimmy DeMatteo and I went out for dinner, afterwards, and grabbed whoever else we were sort of walking in through the hotel at the time. But generally, you're so exhausted that it's some very quick, light meal, and then out for a few beers and a glass of wine or something. So,
that does sound good.
A light meal.
And you've flown lots of different airplanes. And what, in your opinion, is the most underrated airplane? You look at it and you think, oh, I'm not so sure about that one. But you get in and you fly it and you think, actually, this is quite a nice aircraft.
Crikey, that's a good question. I'm not very good at that, am I? I would say no. I can't really answer that. That's what a difficult question. I mean, I'd probably go with an Edge 540. An Edge 540 looks like an interesting little aeroplane, but it is way more than an interesting little aeroplane. It's an incredible aeroplane that people sort of assume is something that it's not. I mean, I've never come across an airplane that has the turning performance that an Edge 540 has. So. And that's not evident when you look at it. It just looks like a pretty normal aerobatic airplane, but nothing that I've ever experienced has the turning performance of an Edge 540. So there you go.
Okay, yeah, that's a good answer. Last question for you. Which aircraft would you own if you could only own one forever and ever?
Well, you've got to go with a Spitfire, haven't you, really? I mean, I wouldn't be able to afford to run it, but I'd go for a Supermarine Spitfire, Mark 5.
Best of British, wonderful. Have you flown a Spitfire?
I have, yes, yeah. They're lovely, but they're very expensive. So I certainly don't own one. I couldn't afford to own one, but they're lovely to fly.
No, they do look beautiful. Well, Steve, it's been an absolute pleasure having a chat with you. I look forward to meeting you in the flesh sometime as this season evolves. All the best with the training camps and setting you all up, and we look forward to 2022 opening season.
Yeah, continue to watch this space. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks a lot.